The Sandy and Toddcast is a Mindgarden Media podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions. Another Sunday, another podcast from the Sandy and Toddcast. You ready for this one?
I'm ready for this one. I think it'll be a really good episode because it's very personal for me, but I think it's probably going to be relatable to a lot of people out there. And we are doing another late recording. I call it late recording, but we're actually recording on Sunday, on the day we're releasing this. So it's about as up to date as it's going to get.
Either we're really lazy or we're just really, really busy. We'll go with the second one on that. Season 5, Episode 7 is on the way. It's called Healing Journey of Hope, and it's next on the Sandy and Toddcast.
We make podcasting easy. Mindgarden Media can get you going on your very own podcast. With many years in the broadcast and audio industry, Mindgarden Media can edit, fully produce, and provide all the web distribution services. We're podcasters too, so we'll guide you every step of the way to a professional-sounding podcast production. For information, email the Mindgarden Media at gmail.com, the Mindgarden Media at gmail.com, or check us out on Facebook.
Broadcasting from two very different yet magical places not found on any map. Get ready to discuss the strange, weird, ghostly, crazy, spooky, and odd things that take place around us each and every day, all while having a little bit of fun. This is the Sandy and Toddcast.
Welcome again to the Sandy and Toddcast. She is Sandy.
He is Todd.
And today is Healing Journey of Hope.
Yeah, I kind of like that name because it's really fitting to the story I want to tell everybody today.
I think, and I don't want to, because this really is your story to tell, but I think it kind of takes us back to when you were here last month. And we were doing many investigations, and we went to the lighthouse. And besides connecting with a bunch of people who are somehow connected to the lighthouse, we truly believe that we connected with my mom there.
Yeah.
And I think for both of us, that little light bulb went above our head and went, oh, because we're so used to connecting with people at locations we go to. You go to an old barn and you're trying to connect with the people who.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily always connect with people who are in our lives or who have been in our lives. And I think that was like a aha moment for both of us.
It was very much an aha moment. I actually feel like I have met your mom. I wish I had been able to meet your mom in person. That obviously didn't work out. It was a couple years too late. But yeah, it's interesting, Todd, because as paranormal investigators, we're always thinking that we're going to connect on investigations, and that happens quite often. But you don't always think that you're going to connect personally. And I think when we were at the lighthouse last month and we connected with your mom, it took everything to a whole new level. And I mentioned to you the other day that actually our connection with your mom gave me the idea for what happened this week. Mm-hmm. And so I will preface the story by saying that I am an extremely private person. I very much pick and choose the things on social media, in my personal life, in my quote unquote real life times that I share with people. Always have been extremely personal. I have an extremely small circle that I consider my closest people in my life. And basically there's like 2 of them.
We're so much alike with that,
I didn't realize it was just 2 of you, but it's just basically you 2 for the most part, that I share all of my intensely personal things, my feelings, my thoughts with.
And let me just say, I'm so happy to be on that list.
Yeah, whatever. And, but I I do think that it's important to share this story, and everybody will see why as I go through it. And I also just want to put a caveat in there that I may get a little emotional because that's who I am, but in the end, it really is a story of hope. So I may not give full details in the story, but you'll definitely get the idea. For several years now, I have had a very close friend, and he lived about 3 hours away down in the Catskills area, and we were very, very close. We had a friendship that is extremely difficult to explain to people. I know what our friendship was like. He knew what our friendship was like. It was very close. Sometimes I was the mom. I took on the mom. Sometimes I managed his
craziness.
I call it craziness.
Yep.
But, but I got him. I understood him. We were very close. We really cared about each other. And it's just a friendship that is very unusual. And it's something that I can't explain to you. I just know how I feel. And where he lived was in an area where cell service was very on and off. And he worked in the same kind of area. He was in the mountains, and it was not unusual for us to go sometimes a few weeks or a month without talking to each other because there was no service. It was very difficult. And we would try to hang out with each other maybe once a year, every couple of years, but our relationship was mostly through texting, which was fine because that was just our friendship. And so I had spoken to him in February. I had been speaking to him quite regularly for the handful of months before that, maybe a week or two in between, and then conversations. And he had just gotten over COVID. So I was a little concerned for him, and he was doing okay. He had had it pretty rough. He was, boosted everything, but he had had it pretty rough. And so we had spoken, and he says, geez, I want to come up and see you. I want to visit. And I said, okay, just give me some notice, because he was the kind of person that would literally just hop in his car and say, I'm coming up, and I got to figure out what to do about it. And so I said, just give me notice, because I work such weird hours, and we'll hang. And then this was mid-February. I didn't hear from him for a while. And then I didn't hear from him for a while. And on April 28th, I texted him and I said, hey, are you okay? And I didn't get a response. And a few things were going through my mind at that point. He was in the midst of some home issues and things. And I thought, well, if it was just service issues, he would have contacted me by now. So I thought, well, maybe in the midst of all of his home issues, he lost his phone, he damaged his phone. And you know how it is today, Todd. People put all of their contact details in these phones. We don't write anything down in a book anymore.
No way. Right, exactly.
Nope. And so I just thought, geez, you know what? He lost his phone. He doesn't have my number. I probably isn't thinking to go back and look for the email. And so I said, all right, I'll give it a little bit longer. He'll probably just show up on my doorstep someday. And he didn't. And a few weeks later, I tried it again. And he didn't. And now that was in May. And I let it go and I let it go. And I don't know what possessed me to do this. And we'll go back to a few other things after the story is over. I don't know what possessed me to do this last Friday morning, but I Googled his name and I found a story that he had died tragically. on April 26th. And I had no way of knowing unless I Googled. And so, please forgive me for getting emotional. I told you guys I was going to. And so, needless to say, this past week has been extremely rough for me. And I feel like I lost somebody. Well, I did. I lost somebody I was very close to. And he was only 40 years old. So he was young. And he was someone who had a heart of gold and tried really hard. He had his problems. I told you I was kind of like his mom a lot. And we worked through a lot of his problems together. And I nurtured him, as I tend to do with people. And so I didn't know what to do. And finally, it hit me because I felt like, Todd, there wasn't some sort of closure. I felt like I had to do something because it was tragic. And so first I tried getting out some of my equipment. I got out my digital recorder, and I got out my REM pod, and I got out my meter. Now, granted, it's important to know that I have never tried to do any of this personally in my life. Never. It's always been for an investigation. But I felt like I have the tools, I have the abilities, that if there was a way to communicate with him, I should have it. Between my natural abilities, my psychic medium, empathic abilities, and these pieces of equipment, I should have some way of being able to communicate somehow, if it's possible. And so I tried them, and I didn't really get anything. I did get some hits on the meter, which were kind of surprising to me because you know how that goes. There can be free floating energy in the air.
Right.
But it's not just so much getting hits, it's the behavior of those hits and where it is. So, for example, if you're getting a 0.6 and it's just a steady 0.6, you can tell one thing. If you're getting a 0.6 and then a 0.3 and then it goes away, it's probably just some sort of fleeting electromagnetic field, something in the home, or the location. When you ask for it to go up or down and it does that, that's a little different. And not to say that's definite proof, but it's something to be considered at that point.
Again, you add that to other experiences.
Exactly.
It was responding to questions, and, maybe something else happened as well. Then you start taking a little bit more credence to what you're experiencing with that particular device.
Exactly. So I thought, well, I wasn't exactly totally encouraged, but I wasn't discouraged either.
In fact, I think you said to me, we discussed this, that there's this thought process where after you die,
mm-hmm.
you can't necessarily communicate immediately. Like right. The energy isn't, you're not able to necessarily communicate, because that has to grow again, or you have to learn how to do that, or maybe you're in a weakened state at that point or something. That's what we kind of discussed.
Yeah, there's some sort of theory that floats around out there. And again, I don't know a lot about that, so I don't know how much credence to give it. But there is a theory out there that sort of like old energy, new energy, that energies in the afterlife tend to become stronger as they get older,
right.
More powerful as they get older. So I did an investigation a year or so ago of a library, and I think that may have been at play in the library. I think that it could have been a factor. So I knew that, this could very well be some sort of attempt to communicate with me, but I couldn't be 100% sure. So I let it go for a day or so, and I was laying in bed, and I thought, I think it was Wednesday night, I was laying in bed, and I thought to myself, I'm going to try the spirit box. I'm going to try the spirit box because, ironically enough, I've never been a huge fan of the spirit box. Only because, I will tell you this, the noise is a lot for me. The noise that comes from the spirit box for me is like too much for my brain to handle a lot of times. And so when I do investigations, I prefer to have somebody put headphones on like the Kindred Spirits people do, Amy and Adam.
Right.
And let them listen to the noise, and I'll ask the questions, because it makes it very hard for me to listen in the moment. Very difficult for me to listen in the moment. So I said, okay, tomorrow morning, I'm going to try the spirit box, and I'm going to see what I get. And we talked about this. I'm not a huge fan of the slower sweeps on the spirit box. I much prefer the little bit faster sweeps. Now, I have a couple different types of spirit boxes. I used the one that wasn't noise canceling. I used the regular spirit box, the S box. And it has 4 settings for speeds on it. And I went with 2 and 3 I used. So I slowed it down just a little bit because of my ability to take in so much noise.
Right.
And I will say this. At the time, I wasn't really listening to the responses because I was concentrating so hard. So what I did was I sat on my floor in my studio where I have all of my woo-woo and spiritual things. And I sat cross-legged, and I put my digital recorder down near the spirit box, and I turned the spirit box on, and I did the AM because I just felt like I should be doing the AM sweep. And I set it up, and I started it, and I wasn't listening to the responses. So I was talking, and I was setting the intention for only him to come through. I don't want anybody else in. And I think that's important to do. I think it's very important to always set an intention, because you want to make sure that the person or the entity or the spirit or the energy, whatever you want to call that, that's coming through to you is your intended target. It's the person that you want to communicate with. And so I set my intention, and I did about 15 minutes with the spirit box, and I asked a bunch of questions. And I turned it off, and I, of course, was emotional. But and it's important to note before I talk about this next part, it's important to understand that as a paranormal investigator, and just as a very commonsensical kind of person myself anyways, I know I'm a very emotional person. I think that's a lot the empath and a lot the psychic, the medium, being able to connect so easily with people. But I do try to take a commonsensical approach to everything. And as a paranormal investigator, my approach is always one of open-mindedness, but yet critical thinking and common sense. So I don't go into anything swayed one way or the other for what I'm going to hear. And if I think I might be, I will always reach out to someone else and get their opinion on it, which I sent you and Dave copies of everything that I uncovered during the 2 sessions. I actually did a session in the afternoon as well. Now, I'm not going to play for you guys everything that came through because a lot of it is very personal. I actually asked how it happened when he passed, and I got the answer that made 150% sense to me. I will say that the answers that I did get, the really important answers, were very clear, and I did ask you guys for your opinions, and you basically agreed. I mean, they were very clear. The first one I'd like to play is when I asked for him to say my name. And I said, "Can you say that?" And I got this response.
Can you say that?
So can I say what I thought when I heard that one?
Yeah.
As an investigator, when you hear that, and it's that clear, I mean, how do you respond to that, right? I mean, how can you say, well, that's nothing, you know?
I just don't know. It's, there's so many layers to it. It's obviously intelligent because it said my name, and it said my name clearly. And it said my name in response to the question, "Can you say my name?"
Right.
I did miss the first part. You pointed that out to me. When I heard it, I broke down. Obviously, I broke down. Who's not going to break down in the middle of this? It was a very emotional time. But you said there's "miss you" at the beginning.
If you just listen to the clip, there's kind of this fuzziness before your name.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I heard it, I heard "miss you, Sandy."
Yeah. Yeah. And I missed that part. I didn't hear that part because it's kind of layered underneath.
Yes.
You know, EVPs, I don't consider Spirit Box EVP.
Correct.
Okay. I don't do that. But I have had many EVPs over the years that have had people talking underneath the noise, sort of layered in there. And it's sometimes very hard to hear them unless you know, obviously, what you're listening for, that you're listening for something. But there can be different layers, and not everything is a Class A. But to me, if I were to call this an EVP, that would be, or label it as I would an EVP, that was it said my name.
Yep.
What are the chances of that?
Is this the first time you've had your name said ever?
Yes. Ever. And again, whether it was investigations or this was the first time I ever did anything personally. But no matter what, in any investigation, I have never had my name said. And the fact that it was said so clearly during this session.
Yeah, there's no question about it.
Blew me away.
It's not like it could be saying Andy or Randy or Candy.
Or Cindy or, it's. No, it was
Ron.
Ron. Miss you, Ron. It's like, so that was one that really, it's interesting. It not only gave me hope, but it also, again, we've talked about this so many times before, that each time that you experience something new, or watch something new, or see something new, it sort of molds your future perspective on things. It changes the way you look at whether it's investigating or theories or life itself.
Mm-hmm.
It just changes you. And I was immediately changed. And I do not, and I repeat this, I do not want to become, and this is another reason why I thought it was important to tell this story. I do not want to become one of those people that becomes obsessed with now using the S-Box to communicate with him. Because I think that people tend to do that. I've heard stories of like people who have started investigating their own homes and then kind of become a little bit obsessed with the idea and then do EVPs constantly in their whole and let it rule them. That's not what this is about. This was my need to get some answers. And I guess you don't get closure, but I think it's different when you have a loved one who passes and it's somewhat expected. When your grandfather is 93 and you know that his time is coming to an end and he passes. Doesn't make it easier, but it makes it a little more manageable and understandable than someone who dies so young and tragically. And so what it did for me is I said, I'm going to do it one more time. I'm going to try this again. And so in the afternoon, I did it again. And I asked some different questions. That's the session where I started to think more about going a little deeper because I realized that I could. And so I asked how I knew how he passed, but I wanted to know why he passed the way he did. So I asked that question. I asked him to talk about his children. I asked him to talk about whether he visits people. Things that are curious to me. I asked where he is. I actually got a response that said heavens. And that was very clear. You heard that one. Mm-hmm. But then I said, I love you. And I do. I mean, I think it's important for people to understand that we are taught from the time that we're children that there's only certain types of love in the world. And especially love between a man and a woman can almost be taboo at times. Right. Even though there's so many different types of love. I mean, look at you and I. You and I are like brother and sister now. Like, we are that connected now. That's not wrong. So I felt it was important for me to say, I love you. And so I got this.
I love you. I miss you.
So this one, probably not a class A, as I would say. When I listened back to it, I heard it immediately. And if you want to talk about breaking down, when I heard my name, this was 10 times bigger for me because this actually has his inflection and his tone. And it says, I love you too. And I think that pretty much did me in. That, like I said, there were some other things that were asked and answered that were very clear. You heard them. Dave heard them. You guys agreed with me on it.
I mean, and I'm not giving anything away, but names of family members that you asked for came through.
They did. And there were some that weren't as clear. So we kind of did our paranormal investigator type of analysis and said, okay, we kind of have to discount these because we just can't be 100% sure. Not everything was 100%. But the things that came through so clear, I'm just so speechless as far as what to do about it, or how to think about it, because I never in a million years expected to hear these things. And especially when you hear it come through similar to someone's voice. Mm-hmm. That's mind-blowing. And so for the first time, that whole day on Thursday was like insane for me. And let's all cap it off with the fact that Wednesday night I got my second shingles shot, my booster shot. So I felt like I had the flu all day Thursday, by the way. And it was just crazy. But I will tell you this, for the first time since I found out on Friday, I went to bed at night because, your mind is racing at night. Yeah. And it has all this time in the world to think about things. And I would just break down in bed every night. I didn't cry. And I thought that was amazing because I actually felt better knowing that he was there, that he communicated with me, and that I do believe life goes on.
And you had the chance to say, I love you one more time. And he had the chance to say it one more time. And here's the other thing that I think is interesting. You were mentioning a while back, you're not going to be getting out the spirit box weekly and having, getting out a bottle of wine and talking with your friend. But,
I don't think that's healthy. I just don't call me crazy. I don't think that's healthy.
You do know that if you need to communicate SB, Ghost Box or whatever. Yeah. That you're going to be able to with him.
Yes. And now I feel like he is always with me. And a lot of people go through grief and feel like they're alone and they've lost somebody. But I don't think that's true. I just don't. Not after this. This was a very life-changing experience for me, Todd. Because although I do believe that there is more afterwards, we've seen it, we've felt it, we've heard it, we've experienced it in our investigations. This was so personal. And that's why I keep going back to your mom, because that for me, I know it was for you, but for me as well, that was deeply personal.
Well, and because you've had very little death in your life, we've talked about this too. Your grandmother, your grandparents were really the death that you had in your life as an adult. You haven't had much since then.
No.
And this just puts an exclamation mark at the end of a sentence that says, when you investigate, do it with respect.
Yes.
Because now that you know that you have communication with this individual who's very close to you, the last thing you ever want to have happen, not that anybody would, but somebody investigating come across that energy and be disrespectful, you wouldn't want that. So it's a reminder to us. And that's what happened when my mom died. I mean, I was never an investigator who went in demanding and threatening and all. That's not who I am in real life. Yes, but not as an investigator. I'll right. Right?
I know.
I'm meaner to you than I am to the ghosts. But
that takes me back to our story from last week where we realized how alike we are and how blocky we both are.
Well, I could always say I've never danced on a grave, but
true.
But having somebody close to you pass away and having some communication with them after. And I had, communication with my mom way back when she passed away. Even I think that she communicated with me before she died. Just puts that all in perspective, makes you realize the respect is so important. I don't want somebody bullying my mother, and I certainly don't want somebody bullying this individual either.
I always go into everything thinking two things, and I've said this before, but what can I learn from this? Mm-hmm. And how can I help in some way?
Right.
And I think that is the way that everyone, I don't care if you're a psychic or a medium or a psychic medium or an empath. I don't care if you're an investigator. Every single one of us should be going into a situation with that in mind.
I know you had a lot going on that day, so you probably didn't get to that question, but do you think that you may try to communicate somewhere in the future and ask this individual, is there anything I can do to help you? Do you think you will do that at some point?
Yes. I actually thought about this because I walk a line because I haven't done this often, but I have done this before. Not for someone I've known and cared for personally, but I have done it. I have helped cross people over. And it's been on the forefront of my mind for several days now, since Thursday. If at some point, and I'm not saying I'm never going to do the spirit box again. I will do the spirit box again and communicate with him. But if at some point I feel or find out that he would like to be crossed over completely, I will cross him over. And I think that's the biggest service that I could do for someone who wants to go. Now, there's a lot of debate on tragic deaths that people are sort of stuck. I've experienced this in a previous investigation that I did a couple years ago. They died. It was a husband and wife who died tragically, and they were still in the spot where they died. And I didn't know enough then to know what to do about it, if it was possible to do something. I always ask permission of whoever owns the location before I do something. But if he were to say to me, yes, I want to go I want to just move on. Would I be able to do that personally? I mean, I know I could do it.
You would.
But I would.
And I want to clarify
It would be a loss.
But here's the thing. Well, hold on.
I would do it.
Here's the thing. I think I want to try and change your thinking process on something. I don't believe in crossing over in that when you cross somebody over, you're not moving them from being able to be here and communicate.
Yeah.
Crossing over to me is, and you mentioned it, being in a tragic situation or a bad energy situation.
Yeah.
Sometimes our energy gets stuck.
Yeah, you're right.
Our energy is kept someplace and we don't want it there. This happens in our real life. Yeah. Our energy is sucked from us all the time from things that we don't want to give it to, and we don't have control over that. So when you go into this kind of realm, crossing people over or moving them on doesn't mean they're gone, doesn't mean their energy goes away, doesn't mean it goes to heaven or hell or anything like that. What it means is you release that energy from where it's stuck in that location, the accident location, and you release that energy to go to better places. That's what you do. But that doesn't mean that he's going to be gone. It just means that you're taking away that link that he has to what happened that day and allowing him to be free.
That's an amazing way to look at it. And you're right. That makes absolute sense. And you're right. I think I kind of looked at it that way, but never quite like that. And that is amazing. And you're right. I think that's true.
He's never going to not be with you when you need him or want to, whatever. But you will hopefully be able to help him if he's stuck there, if he's stuck in that moment, if his energy is captured, and you might be able to help him. Now, after this happened, and I don't even know if it was after we got the audio and all that, or if it was before, but I said to you, what was the date that this happened? Because I had a feeling you went through a very weird period right about that time. A lot of stuff going on. You had a lot of anxiety. And I said to you, I just wonder if you knew about this without actually knowing about this. And that to me is like the second part of this incredible story.
Yeah. Let's go back, because once you mentioned that to me and we had a couple of discussions about it, I got thinking, and I know it was before he passed, probably in March, for some reason that I have no idea about. And I'll preface this by saying this kind of stuff has happened to me before, and it's emerged even more in the past, I would say probably 6 to 8 months. We talked about it with your accident. It's happened to me with a couple of other things, smaller things. But right around probably March, I actually Googled his name when I hadn't heard from him in like a month or so. And I Googled his name looking for an obituary. I don't know why I did that. I have no idea. And at the time, these things aren't a big deal. Like, I know it's a big deal to Google somebody's name to look for an obituary.
But we've all done that. Maybe not to look for an obituary, but you look for a story or something. Maybe somebody ended up in jail or they became rich, and you can reach out and try and get some cash out of them. Yeah.
And so I didn't think anything of it. I just did it, and there was nothing. And maybe a couple weeks later, I was sitting in my studio working, and Spike was laying in his bed next to me. And I have you're going to laugh at me, but I have my gun cabinet in my studio because that's where it's been forever before it was a studio.
Ding a ding 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 ding.
And so my gut, and this is interesting too, because he was very much, he had guns too. He was very much into guns. And so there's my gun cabinet, a little bit, about a foot of wall space, and then I have a 3-tier shelf that I keep like my candles and my sage and all that stuff in. And in between there is I think you guys have seen it when we did our lives. We talked about it a couple times. My religious candle that has Snoop Dogg on it. And it's just sitting
back there sipping on gin and juice.
That's what it's doing. It was relaxing, right? So it's just sitting there, and it's been there for months, Todd, literally months, in the same spot, in the same position, not doing anything. And all of a sudden, and honestly, I said a couple weeks later, but I actually think that it was probably after he passed, the more I think about it. This was probably, I looked up his name around the end of March, and he passed on April 26th. And probably right after he passed, all of a sudden, for no reason, that candle just fell down. For no reason. Nothing. And I set it back up, and it's been there ever since. It's the only time in months and months and months that candle ever fell down. Again, not thinking anything of it. And then that whole week that he passed on a Tuesday, that entire probably 2 weeks afterwards, would you say? At least a couple weeks afterwards, I was an absolute wreck. And yes, something happened in my life that wasn't good, but normal me would have handled that. And so when you brought that up to me, I thought, oh my God, I wonder if somehow I know. Like, I wonder if two things. A, I knew before it happened that it was going to happen, because this seems to be like the norm for me now, that I'm sort of predicting these weird things. But then when it happened, I knew it happened. And I didn't know it happened, if that makes sense to everybody. And so that's like the other half, like you said, to the story is, what did I know? What did I really know, like subconsciously? And again, I'm like a baby in all of this. I know these abilities I have, but I don't understand totally these abilities that I have, how to manage them, what to do, because I'm still learning. So I can't help but think, wow, if it was 2 years from now, would I be more in tune with what I was feeling and experiencing and what happened? I wonder if he knocked that candle over to get my attention. I really do. If it wasn't for the spirit box sessions, I still wouldn't have thought as much about it. But coupled with that, I really think that that's very possible. It's pretty crazy.
Healing journey of hope. And I think the one thing to keep in mind is, if you have someone that you've lost in life and you want, I hate the term communicate, but
yeah,
if you want to connect with them, you don't need to run out and get a Mel meter. You don't need a K2 meter. You don't need an SB7. You don't need an audio recorder. Although I'm all for taking your phone and running a recording app while you're doing it. You never know what you could find.
Yep.
But to sit down and be in that headspace and that mind space and that energy space, you can connect with whomever you want to.
Yeah, you can.
And even if it's just, I think about my grandma Deering, and when I think of her, I immediately think of her house. And I think of the window in it was her dining room, but there was a big couch that sat in there, and the sun would come through and played in the trees that were outside. And it was just the nicest place to sit. I love sitting there looking out the window. And I think of my grandma cooking, and I think of, those wonderful smells and all that. And am I talking to her? Am I communicating with her? I don't know that, but I think I'm connecting with her to a certain degree.
Yeah, I agree. There's also a lot of articles, if you Google them, there's a lot of articles about using your healing stones, your crystals, to help you to connect. And meditation can help you to connect. And some great ideas about how to deal with grief. Writing letters to them, notes, talking to them. It's all a great way to connect.
Yep.
It really is. And I think that this shows that no matter what you do, regardless of what you do, you will connect. They are there.
what I'd like to see, we had a lot of discussion on our Facebook page last week regarding energies and stuff like that. I would love to have some discussion here. I'd love to know what people think they hear in those messages. I would like to know their stories about connecting with others that have passed. All that. So if you're listening to this on Facebook, just go. Otherwise, if you're listening on another platform, go to our Facebook page and let us know what you think. I would love to know. Or go to the group Friends of the Sandy and Toddcast and shoot some messages in there. I think it's a very, very good topic.
Yeah, and next week I'd like to share a couple of stories that we had from that conversation about energies last week and the thoughts there, and maybe continue that conversation a little bit. And then maybe we can talk a little more about family next week.
Yeah, I would love to.
And I think that would be really good, and share some of our experiences and the things that our journey. We had quite a journey with you last year at the end of the year, right before your accident, finding family. And so tracing some roots. And so I think that would be really good. So just bottom line, before we get to our spiel, don't give up hope, because I really believe that they are out there. So here's our spiel really quick before we say goodbye.
You can find the Sandy and Toddcast on any of the platforms that you normally find your podcasts, including YouTube and Twitter. Be sure to like the Sandy and Toddcast on Facebook to keep up on the latest goings-on, including each week's episode. You can also join our group, Stay Weirdos Friends of the Sandy and Toddcast, for more fun. Stay Weirdos is a safe place to share your thoughts, feelings, ideas, and random inappropriate memes without judgment. Sandy and Todd also have a podcast called The Empathicary Podcast. It's for empaths by empaths. And if you know an empath, you might want to listen too. Find and like the page on Facebook. And finally, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast and just aren't sure where to start, Sandy and Todd can also help with that too. Mindgarden Media is their latest project, where the dynamic duo can guide you every step of the way in your podcasting journey. Editing, producing, and consulting is what they do. Like Mindgarden Media on Facebook, or email them at themindgardenmedia@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for staying weird.
Oh, you know what I was told last week? I was told my English accent was very good, actually. Yes, yes, Lorna said that it was very, very good. Very English-like, yes.
I love Lorna. We got to get her on the show.
I'm trying, but she's shy. You know, she's so shy.
Don't be shy. It's just us. Look, if anybody can do it, and we're the goofiest, weirdest people alive.
Yeah.
You know, if we can do it, anybody can get on and talk about it. And I think it's really cool. So, if anybody is interested in coming on with us, sharing some of their own personal stories or thoughts or opinions, we'd love to have you come on. I think it's really cool to invite people in to share their own opinions and thoughts on things, whether they agree with us or not.
Well, if you don't agree with us, go to hell. But other than that, I'm just kidding.
We'll bring bejesus back.
Bejesus will come back.
Bejesus is due. So,
all right. Until next week, we'll say bye.
Bye.